Hey guys, it's Darwin, here today to talk about the pros and cons of ditching your backpacking stove and why I decided to go stoveless. Okay, so if you've been following along with my recent videos, I recently hiked a section of the CDT. I decided for that section that I would try something different that I've been wanting to do for a while, and that was going stoveless. Next year in 2018, I'll be hiking the PCT, doing a full through hike, and that first 700 miles is all mainly desert. So the idea of going stoveless in that first 700 miles of the desert sounded like a good idea. Number one is convenience. For me, I really love to cook. I love to cook at home. I love a good hot meal. Whenever I'm on the trail, I love to get into a town and eat hot town food. But one of the biggest inconveniences for me when I was on the AT in 2015 and 2016 was coming to camp, having to boil water for food, and waiting to cook food. You know, already you have all these camp chores that you have to do, blowing up your pad if you do have an inflatable pad, setting up your tent, getting everything ready for camp, relax a little bit, sit under the stars, go to sleep so you can get up and hike the next day. So to me, the whole idea of going stoveless sounded good because it sounded like I didn't have to put as much work in with boiling water and getting dinner ready. I could just kind of grab whatever I needed to, eat it, go to bed, and be ready for the next day. Number two, less stuff. So obviously if you're going stoveless, you don't need fuel, you don't need a stove, you don't need all of those things that you need whenever you are cooking and prepping your meals. Now, between my stove setup and a stoveless setup, there's not a giant weight difference, so it wasn't really about weight for me. It was about having to deal with less items. You know, my stove that I carried on the AT and the AZT is about 1.8 ounces. It's the Snow Peak LiteMax stove. It weighs barely anything, it takes up no room, but still, it was one less thing that I have to worry about when I'm going stoveless. The other thing is worrying about fuel. So when we were on the AT in 15 and 16, you know, a lot of times we would really have to check our fuel consumption and make sure that we could resupply on a fuel canister whenever we could get into a town. Sometimes we couldn't find fuel canisters, and from what I understand, on the Continental Divide Trail and the Pacific Crest Trail, it's even harder in some sections to find canisters, so a lot of times you kind of have to worry about that. So the idea of not having to worry about fuel sounded good. Fuel canisters can also be quite expensive. Now, if you're going out for a weekend backpacking trip, it's not so bad. But whenever you're doing something like a through hike, you're boiling water to make coffee in the morning, you're making breakfast, maybe even eating a hot lunch, and then making dinner at night, so you're consuming a lot of fuel. And those little canisters can add up and get pretty expensive. Number three is no cleanup. So obviously, whenever you boil water to cook a meal and you're making something like instant mashed potatoes or maybe a Nora rice side, you have to clean out your pot. You have to take the time after you've eaten to go find a water source, get away from the water a little bit, clean your pot out, and completely dry it and do all of that. So it was an extra chore that I was really happy to kind of take out of my trail routine. It's also more water that you have to use. So if you're dry camping and you're not near a water source, like on the section of the CDT that I did, when, you know, there were some times where at night there was no water at camp. And then during the day where I had to hike 15 miles without seeing any type of water source, it's less water that I have to worry about having to make sure that I have at camp. And then on the PCT, there's a huge section. The first 700 miles from the beginning all the way to Kennedy Meadows is strictly desert and a lot of very dry sections, where at some points you're carrying from 5 to 7 liters of water. So if I don't have to carry the extra water to cook with and clean with, that's a big plus for me. It's less stuff that I have to worry about, and I can focus more on keeping myself hydrated with the water that I do have. And that brings us to number 4, which is the main reason I decided to go stoveless, and that is conserving water. Again, Next year, in that first 700 miles, I'm really worried about water. Even though I have to a lot of times, I don't like carrying a lot of extra water weight. I'm a bit of a camel when it comes to hiking. I like drinking a lot of water at a water stop, and then I usually hike about 8 miles without drinking a whole lot of water. I typically only drink about a liter in 8 miles, even in the desert. So for me, going stoveless, and meaning that I don't have to carry extra water to cook and clean with, lets me carry less weight and not have to worry about having that extra water. Okay, so what are some of the cons of going stoveless? Now for me, so far, I haven't found a lot of cons. Actually, I found way more positives than I found cons at all. And it's not for everybody. Obviously, there's some people out there that love having their hot coffee in the morning, and I enjoy that as well, and people that need a hot meal at night. To me, it's not that big of an issue. I'm out there to hike, and I'm out there to enjoy nature, so food for me is just calories. And however I can get calories is just fine. Whether it's cold, whether it's hot, whether it's wet, or whether it's dry, I just need calories so I can continue my hike. And the thing that I found is if I really do want a hot meal and it's a cold night, I can always make a small campfire, and I do still carry my Snow Peak Titanium 700 mug that I can always cook over a campfire and boil water if I really need to. Just to make sure that I have the option if I want a hot meal by doing that, I always carry ramen and instant mashed potatoes, because you can either eat those cold and cold soak them, or you can boil water over a campfire and make that hot. So that's a really great option for me. I did that a couple of times on that section hike of the CDT, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Now speaking of food, what types of food do I eat when going stoveless? So it's pretty much the same food that I take when I go with a stove. I eat a lot of tortillas, tuna packs, different cheeses, a lot of different types of bars, granola. For breakfast, I'll typically eat Pop-Tarts or a Pro Bar if I can afford them. And then for dinners, I typically eat a tuna packet with a tortilla, or I also carry ramen noodles or instant mashed potatoes. So just like I would if I was carrying a stove, that way I can either eat them cold by mixing the instant mashed potatoes in cold water, or by cold soaking the ramen, or just eating it dry. And if I really want a hot meal, I can always make that fire, boil my water, and still have it hot. Coffee in the morning, I just carry the Starbucks Via. I'll take my water bottle, take about half of the water in there, add that to it, shake it up, and then I can drink my coffee while I'm breaking down camp. I don't have to worry about having a hot beverage, it cooling off for me to drink it, waiting for the water to boil. So for me, going stoveless has become a huge convenience. Like I said, it's not for everybody. For me, it's worked out pretty well, and from what I understand, there are a lot of long distance hikers that are going that route. Mainly for the reasons that I just explained. It's just more convenient. All right, so tell me what you guys think. If you started going stoveless, maybe you guys have to have a stove and you have to have hot meals. Leave me some comments in the comment section below and let me know what you think about going stoveless. If you haven't got a chance yet, go over and check me out on Instagram. I've been posting a lot of new photos lately of some of the things Snuggles and I have going on throughout the week, plus a bunch of pictures from my section hike of the CDT, so make sure you go check those out if you haven't already. Go ahead and like or dislike this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and as always guys, thanks for watching.